ABC Southern Queensland.
I mentioned there's a lot happening this weekend, a lot of things besides the coronation. This weekend in Brisbane is the premiere of a brilliant cinematic documentary called Flyways, and this film is coming to Toowoomba's Strand Theatre in the next few weeks, and I'll give you the details in a moment. But Flyways is an incredible film. It tells the mostly unknown story, I think, of migratory shorebirds and their epic journey north that they take each year for breeding. They fly thousands of miles each year along ancient and obviously unmarked migratory routes, which are called flyways. But shorebirds, the way they do this is an untold story. What routes do the birds take? How do they know? How do they know which way to go? How do they navigate such mind-boggling distances? How are they able to stay in the air for days without stopping to refuel? When you think of the logistics of what they do, it is absolutely staggering. Well, this film is about answering these and other questions and exploring the wonder of migratory shorebirds. I had the pleasure of seeing a sneak preview, and it really is a wonderful film. Writer, director, cinematographer, producer Randall Wood made the film, and he joins me now. Randall Wood, good morning. Welcome.
And you, David. Great to be here.
And congratulations on a magnificent film. I mean, it was as compelling as any drama I've seen at the cinema. And I like documentaries, but this one sort of had me not so much on the edge of my seat, but put it this way, I didn't drop off to sleep. I wanted to see what happened, and it seemed like life through a number of little, curls and I guess different sort of took the story in different ways that you couldn't have anticipated. But can I go back to before that, or I want to ask you about that in a moment, but what was it like the first time you watched the film from the beginning to the end? Because it was such a long time in the making.
I don't often cry, David, but I did weep a small tear because pulling a film like that together, it does take a lot of work, and it did take a lot of I'd say adventuring, and some near deaths. We were traced by moose and foxes and other places, so it was a big job to make. And also, of course, we battled with COVID and the war ultimately in Russia. So it was a big relief to watch the film right through, and I did enjoy it. I also kind of felt for it. So I look forward to the fact that the film is more than just what you see. There's a lot underpinning a film like this.
I think that's the interesting thing to me as someone with an interest in filming, but I guess also an interest in the story behind a story that you see. And obviously the 85 minutes that we watched, there was so much more preparation, and the logistics of doing it were incredible. But and I'm going to ask you about that shortly. But how did it start? When did you first become interested in migratory journey of shorebirds?
Well, I've always been interested in birds. And my grandmother, who was a great lover of birds, lived on Moreton Bay, on the edges of the bay, in Redland Bay, on a big, old, beautiful orchard called Mount Carmel Orchard. She taught me first about the shorebirds there because, of course, they were in that region. And then later, when I lived on the coast myself, I lived down near Shorncliffe in a place called Sandgate. I started to read about them. And that's when I became truly fascinated, because I discovered just how far they fly and for what reasons. And that started getting me interested. And then, of course, I discovered that Queensland's changing, and some of the big developments that we've got here in Queensland, which, of course, we can celebrate for what some of that is, but I've taken over the land that these birds need. And what that means is that some of them are becoming very extinct. So that drove me to want to make a film about these birds and to sort of look at what's happening and why, and what part we can play in helping that.
That's something that struck me at the end. I would imagine the motivations, as you've just touched on there, to make this film were many and varied. But was that your primary motivation, to show people that not only here in Australia, but all the way along, our development, our human sort of encroachment on natural habitats is actually affecting this whole species' viability in the long term? Did you want to sort of shine the spotlight on that more than anything else?
Don't know about shining the spotlight on. I think I was really interested in just exploring the joy of what birds do, that sort of incredible spirit that drives them to fly the whole length of the world, and
Mm.
what that means to the globe as a globe. I was quite interested in the idea that if the globe was a brain, what we're looking at here are neural pathways that travel right from the south of the brain right to the north and right down back to the south again, twice a year. So I started trying to map that out across the entire planet, and it started to become quite complex and extraordinary. When you see that we're not just part of one flyway, we're part of many, you start to understand that this is a very interconnected and very interrelated system. So what are we doing? What are these birds doing? Why do they do it? Why do they have these set routes they fly? I started becoming interested in what the world is. And then, of course, the part that we play in that as humans to preserve and conserve this environment does matter. It matters not just to the birds, it actually matters to us. And that's what I've learned, that, biodiversity really does matter to human survival. So let's look at what we're doing to preserve and conserve birds. And of course, that brings on in the whole question of where the birds have to go to get to Alaska or Russia or North China. How do they get there? And on the way, they have to leave Australia and are already in some trouble just here in Moreton Bay. They then have to fly right up to China and touch down there and find food in a place that's changed radically, and then push forward from there up to their other breeding grounds up near Russia, which is again changed because there's a lot of development up there. So they're just getting hit all the way. So we compared the Australian situation to the international situation because, of course, other flyways exist. There are flyways from South America that go right up to Alaska, and flyways from Africa that run right up to North Russia. And so we started running comparisons, and that's where this film finds its strength, I think.
Tell me the logistics of making this film. I mean, I'm thinking, the three scientists that you found were just the perfect people to help tell this story because they were all so passionate. I'm thinking, looking at the gentleman who never did his hair, Professor Jan
Van Gils.
Van Gils, so because he just lived, ate and breathed these birds, and all three of them did. How important was it finding those three people? How crucial was that to the success of the film?
David, on every film, I undertake quite a lot of research. I made a film about earthworms many years ago, a global film about earthworms. That took me all over the world. But what that took me to also was major conferences. So I first highlight the conferences, and I go there and I meet the people in their expertise. I take them into the interview room, which is usually my hotel room. I sit them down and have a chat about their work, and then I take that home, look at it, and sort of assess where they're at and how they might feel about being in a film, and then I'll reapproach them once I know. So certainly on Flyways, I did that. I went to Panama with my partner, and we interviewed a whole lot of people, and a number of other conferences like that up in Alaska and so on. We met these people before we started, and assessed where they're at, how good they were on camera, how they felt about being on camera, and what their science brought to the story. And that's how we could do it. I mean, it does take a lot of work. There's more work going in behind the scenes on a film in this research and fundraising than there is in actually making the film itself often.
Were they, I'm just curious, with that process, were there others that you had approached that didn't meet those criteria for, and I'm not asking you to name and shame them, but I would imagine it would have been like winning lotto if these three that you approached all ended up being good for on camera, wanted to do it, could explain the message concisely in a way that the audience could digest, and just perfect right from the word go. I assume that didn't happen.
Luckily, there's no such thing as perfection. But what I would say is actually our film is more than just what you see on that screen. We have made a vast film that sits underneath that, which will go out as outreach. So some of the best characters in our film aren't necessarily in the feature just at the moment because we couldn't fit that many people in, and maybe sometimes their stories were a bit more complex. So they will come out separately as separate entities. It's what we call outreach. So there's a whole lot of great people, particularly Americans, who are in this story, but who are not in the feature at the moment, but who will come out. So it's kind of exciting that we've got a second layer to this story.
The use of graphics was fantastic in that, I presume, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the up close shots of the bird flying by itself in all sorts of weather, I presume, was CGI. Am I right? You couldn't have sort of gotten a camera that close to a bird that remotely.
David, I'm afraid to say you're wrong.
Really? Really?
Yeah, we flew during COVID to America and then traveled over to Canada to AFAR, which is the Advanced Facility for Avian Research.
Yep.
And entered into the most incredible wind tunnel you've ever seen or been in. And my lovely partner, Deanna Segura, was given the job of actually operating the wind tunnel by the scientists there. And the scientists jumped into the tunnel with me and the camera and a whole crew on a phantom camera and filmed the Western sandpiper in flight up close, a way you could only shoot a bird up close if you had a lot of assistance and a lot of technology and a lot of skill on the part of the scientists. And my fabulous partner, Deanna Segura, who was the wind tunnel operator. So, it was a lot of fun. And that's where all those shots come from. They're super beautiful. By the way, just a little side to that, it took us 3 attempts to cross the border because we're right in the thick of COVID. And I was so determined to get there, no matter what, because I wanted to get those birds up close, because I knew that after many months of trying to shoot them, how impossible that was in the natural world, that we could only do it in this particular facility. So we persevered and we won in the end.
It's Randall Wood, filmmaker extraordinaire. The film is called Flyways. It is a wonderful documentary, and I think I watched it on a small screen, my television set at home. I think your chance to see it on the big screen is one not to be passed up. The Toowoomba screening of Flyways coming to Toowoomba's Strand Cinema on Tuesday, May 30th at 6 p.m. So book your tickets.